After all we've been through, and we're just talking about today, at this point, we just wanted to talk about things with two smart people. So we're happy to welcome back to our broadcast tonight Tim O'Brien, executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, also happens to be the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being the Donald, and Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican National Committee, former lieutenant governor of the great state of Maryland. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Tim, what Donald Trump qualities that you are familiar with, that you have written about, were on display in the Donald Trump you watched today?
I think his full-blown pettiness when he's confronted with opposition, when people are criticizing him in ways he can't control, when other people's legacies, i.e. the legacy of somebody like Senator McCain, who was a war hero, present him with things he can't either compete against or argue against. He gets cornered, and he goes into this sort of grand mal slogging. And while I think today was possibly a new low in his remarks about the senator's funeral and the failure of the senator to thank him, I don't know how that was going to occur, a seance or however he expected to be thanked. It's actually not new behavior. He's been doing this for decades. Business opponents, business partners, politicians in New York. New Yorkers are familiar with this side of Donald Trump. It's not casual behavior. It's really part and parcel of who he is. And I think the thing to understand about him is, for all of his bravado and for all of his braggadocio, he's deeply insecure and he's easily wounded. The odd thing about him is he can perpetually live in that state of being an open wound and move forward in a way most other people can't. But he's been lashing out now, for the better part of 5 decades. He's about to turn 73 years old. And so we've had a half century of Donald Trump as Dennis the Menace.
Thank you for that reminder. Hey, Michael, I want to read you a tweet from the great Maggie Haberman over at the New York Times. Trump has usually gotten a positive reception at his rallies when he has gone after McCain. Maggie traveled with the president to Ohio today, but today at an Army tank plant where POTUS said a third of the workforce is comprised of veterans, there was a very quiet response. And then there was this tonight, Michael, and this kind of broke my heart to see it. The McCain Institute felt the need to put out the facts about John McCain's life. And it broke my heart, I guess, because in our line of work, you've committed these to memory long ago. You know the story of John McCain because John McCain's story was the story of incredible military achievement, of survival as a POW for almost 6 years, and being one of the more consequential members of the Senate over the last half century.
Yeah, Brian, you can say a lot about John McCain. You can have political disputes with him. You can disagree on some policy idea or initiative. But you cannot take away the legacy of the man. You cannot take away the commitment he made as a very, very young midshipman at the United States Naval Academy to this country. And no matter what Donald Trump says, no matter how he says it, no matter to whom he says it or tweets it, at any lifetime, at any moment, John McCain will be the bigger and the better man. It is that simple. And it gnaws at him. It gnaws at him at every turn because you could hear the derision when he said, and I gave him the funeral he wanted. Really? Oh, you gave him a funeral he wanted. John McCain didn't need Donald Trump to give him a funeral. The nation was fully prepared as we watched this man exhibit the kind of strength, even at the moment of his own ending, that, again, was not about McCain. It was about a country. He talked about the country, talked about lifting up the country. So I just sweep all that aside. It's just the pettiness of a petty man who is so afraid of the shadow of the man who's gone before him. So I think that's where we need to leave it when it comes to Donald Trump and John McCain.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.